She walked into Lowell Correctional Institution with the quiet grace of someone who had already made peace with herself. Her name was Janelle Carter, 32 years old, convicted of credit card fraud and sentenced to 6 years. It was her first offense, and she wasn't what most people pictured when they imagined a criminal. No tattoos, no hardened stare, just soft eyes, a smooth voice, and a head full of dark braids she wore in a neat bun every day. The other inmates called her Smiley. Not because she laughed too much, she didn't. It was because, no matter what the day threw at her, she carried a faint smile that never quite left her lips. A guarded, almost ironic curve that suggested she was enduring something the rest of the world couldn't quite see. She kept to herself. She read. She wrote in a small brown notebook. She guarded like it was gold. She worked in a prison laundry, folding sheets and towels, humming under her breath. For a while, her existence inside those walls was invisible, and she was fine with that. But not everyone overlooked her. There was one man who noticed Janelle's quiet defiance. Correctional Officer Curtis Langston, a 43-year-old Army vet, broad-shouldered with a salt and pepper beard, and an air of command that the other officers admired. He was strict but polite, cold but not cruel, and when he spoke to inmates, it was always clipped and professional. Until it came to Janelle. At first, it was small things. A longer glance in the chow hall. A brief pause when she passed through the security gate. A comment, quiet and deliberate. "You don't belong in here." Most women inside had learned to ignore such attention. Prison is a dangerous place for a woman, especially when you're pretty, quiet, and smart. Janelle had heard stories. She had seen what happened when you flirted back or rejected too hard. But Curtis wasn't like the others. He wasn't vulgar. He didn't push. He just lingered. Then came the little favors. He assigned her to work detail near his station. When guards searched other inmates' bunks, they skipped hers. One morning, a fresh toothbrush and a new pair of socks mysteriously appeared in her locker. She said nothing, but her smile tightened just a little. The other women noticed. "You got a secret admirer, girl." One teased. Janelle just shook her head. "I don't mix fantasy with reality." But reality in prison is slippery. Weeks passed. As presence grew more intentional, he started assigning Janelle to late-night janitorial shifts, just the two of them in the empty education wing. There were no cameras in that hallway. Everyone knew it. That was where inmates smoked contraband cigarettes or traded favors. Janelle knew better. But one night, when she reached for the mop closet door, Curtis was already there, holding it open. "Just you tonight," he said. His voice was low, not threatening, almost gentle. She didn't move. He stepped closer, the smell of cheap cologne and starch of a uniform filling her lungs. "You think I'm going to hurt you?" he asked, and something in his tone wasn't a question. Janelle's smile faltered, not because she was afraid, because she understood exactly what was happening and how powerless she was to stop it. From that night on, things changed. They weren't together, not in the way the word meant on the outside, but they shared glances, long silences, occasional brushes of the hand. He brought her small things, a granola bar, a pack of cocoa, a pen that actually worked. She gave him trust, or what little of it she could afford. But inside, she was writing everything down. Names, dates, every encounter, every word. In the margins of her brown notebook, next to poems and reflections, were cold facts. Because Janelle Carter wasn't naive. She knew how this story ended for women like her. She had watched the documentaries. She'd read the stats. And she didn't plan on being a footnote. Still, the affair deepened. He started calling her baby when no one was around, slipping her through side hallways during counts, threatening other inmates who looked at her too long. Janelle tried to create boundaries, but they didn't exist anymore, not in a place like Lowell. And soon, she found herself lying awake at night, wondering, was this protection or possession? And then came the moment she couldn't ignore, the late-night shift where he pulled her into an empty office, locked the door, and didn't ask for permission. She didn't scream. What would be the point? She didn't report it. Who would believe her? She just walked back to her cell, blood on her thighs, locked herself in, and didn't speak for 2 days. Her cellmate, a woman named LaToya, tried to ask, "What happened to you, Smiley?" But Janelle just rolled over and stared at the wall. Weeks passed, then months, and then her body began to change. It started small: nausea, dizziness, cravings. Janelle knew her body. She didn't need a test. She didn't need a nurse. She was pregnant. She stared at herself in the mirror of the prison bathroom one morning, hand flat against her lower stomach, and whispered, "They're gonna kill me." Because what people don't understand is that in a place like prison, pregnancy is more than a scandal. It's a threat. It exposes everything: the broken policies, the corrupted power, the crimes hidden in plain sight. And Janelle knew too much. She knew names. She had dates. She had journal pages hidden inside her mattress, under the lining, sealed in a plastic sleeve. She had leverage. But leverage means nothing when the system doesn't care if you live or die. Still, she wore her faint smile. Every morning in the cafeteria. Every evening in her bunk. Even as whispers spread, even as her belly began to swell, Janelle kept smiling. But behind that smile was something else now. Not peace, not endurance. It was preparation, because she knew they were watching. And she knew, eventually, they'd come for her. Janelle Carter had been in prison for over a year, when the line between protection and possession blurred beyond repair. It began in corners of the facility where surveillance cameras mysteriously didn't work, where sound and echo and secrets clung to the cinder block walls like mildew, where Curtis Langston, Officer Langston, claimed her piece by piece, and Janelle learned just how many rules a uniform could rewrite. He didn't have to say much anymore. A single look from him could freeze time, and when he entered a room, other guards stepped back. He had built himself a kingdom inside those fences, not with violence, but with quiet control. The warden trusted him. His reports were clean. His shifts were long and loyal. But no one ever asked what he did when the lights dimmed in the education wing, or why Janelle was always assigned to clean it. She stopped keeping track of the nights. They all melted into one endless reel of stolen moments and silenced fears. Sometimes it was just a whispered command in the hallway. "Storage room, 5 minutes." Other times it was more deliberate. A chair pushed against a locked office door, the buzz of a radio turned up just loud enough to drown out the sound of a woman being broken from the inside out. It wasn't always violent. That made it worse. Because on some nights, Curtis acted like this was love. He spoke in low tones, called her beautiful, asked her questions about life before prison. "You from Tampa, right? What high school you go to? You got siblings? You ever think about having kids?" She never answered. Not really, because there was no before anymore. Not after what he did to her body. Not after what he was doing to her soul. And yet, every time she looked into his face, she saw a man who truly believed she should be grateful, like he was giving her something special, as if choosing her somehow justified the horror of it all. In the beginning, she tried to resist. She would stall, pretend she had cramps, say she had to clean the toilets in D block. But Curtis had ways of making things difficult when she didn't obey. He'd reroute her shifts to colder blocks, delay her food, deny her visitation. One time, her mother showed up for a surprise visit, and Curtis couldn't find Janelle in time. Another time, she spent 2 nights in solitary for talking back. There were no rules for men like him, just routines, loopholes, shadows. In a world of cement and steel, Curtis made himself a god, and Janelle his reluctant disciple. Her notebook became her only weapon. It was no longer just poetry or quiet journaling. She filled it with clinical detail now. Exact quotes, times, descriptions, every threat, every violation. She wrapped the notebook in a Ziploc bag and stitched it beneath the thin mattress on her bunk. A quiet rebellion, a silent cry for the truth, in case she ever disappeared. Then came the turning point. A cold morning in late February. The prison nurse, a tired woman with thick glasses and an emotionless face, called Janelle in for a routine screening. When the urine test came back positive, the nurse blinked. "You're pregnant," she said, as casually as if she were announcing a weather update. Janelle felt her breath catch. Her heart didn't race. It dropped like a stone tossed into a deep well. "How far?" she asked. "Looks like 10 to 12 weeks. The silence between them stretched too long. The nurse glanced up, lowered her voice. "Do you want to talk to someone? A counselor?" Janelle didn't blink. "I want to speak to a lawyer." That was the beginning of the end. Within hours, the prison erupted in quiet chaos. Janelle was transferred from the general population to a private medical cell. They called it medical isolation, but it felt more like a quarantine. She was alone. No bunkmate, no books, no pen, no access to her notebook. Curtis never visited her again, not directly. Instead, other guards began passing cryptic messages. "You think they'll believe your word over his? You want to make your time harder than it already is? You had a good thing going. Now look what you did." One female guard, Officer Wilkins, stopped by with an empty food tray and whispered through the small slot in the door. "You think you're the first one?" Janelle's eyes widened. "What?" Officer Wilkins looked away. "You're just the one that got caught." Days passed in that room. The walls felt tighter with each hour. The mattress was thinner, the food colder, the guards quieter. No one spoke to her anymore unless they were warning her. Then came the visit from Internal Affairs. 2 men in stiff suits. One took notes. The other leaned against the wall like he'd heard it all before. Janelle told him everything, every moment, every place, every act. She asked him to find her journal. She begged him to look at the guard schedules. They nodded, took down the details. Then they left. Nothing changed. Curtis Langston wasn't arrested. He wasn't even fired. He was reassigned, the official term for brushing rot under a rug. Rumors spread he was on paid leave, fishing down the Keys while Janelle sat in a cold cell with nothing but her growing belly and a flickering ceiling light. Still, she held on to hope. Somewhere in her gut, beneath the fear, the nausea, the fatigue, she believed someone out there would care enough to listen. Her mother, her lawyer, her unborn child. But behind the gates of Lowell, that hope was fading fast. One evening, Officer Wilkins returned. She slid a folded paper through the food slot. Janelle unfolded it. Scrawled in pencil were 5 words. "They know. Protect your truth." She stared at the words, rereading them again and again, until her vision blurred. Then she climbed onto the stiff mattress, slipped her hand into the seam, and checked for the notebook. It was gone, and in that moment, for the first time since entering prison, Janelle's smile vanished completely, because she finally understood. This wasn't just a forbidden affair. This was a setup, and someone was cleaning up the mess. By the time Janelle Carter was 5 months pregnant, her silence had become a kind of rebellion. Inside her new cell, cold, windowless, cut off from the rhythm of the rest of Lowell Correctional, she waited, not just for her due date, not just for justice. She waited for someone to do the right thing. Someone in that fortress of concrete and secrets to speak her name with dignity. But no one did. No guards asked about the baby. No nurses offered updates. And no other inmate even saw her anymore. She had become a ghost. A walking scandal whose existence threatened to expose the darkest corners of Florida's prison system. The administration didn't just want to forget her. They wanted to erase her, slowly, quietly, permanently. But life growing inside a woman can't be hidden forever. The bump beneath her prison-issued shirt had become undeniable. Her posture shifted. Her movement slowed. Her face thinned. Yet still, no official record mentioned her pregnancy. There were no formal announcements. No documented prenatal care. Just hushed whispers in the hallway and icy stares through thick glass. One day, during a rare escorted walk to the medical unit, she passed by a group of inmates in the outdoor yard. Her eyes locked with LaToya, her old cellmate. In that brief, electrified second, LaToya's face twisted in horror. Janelle tried to raise a hand in greeting, but the guard jerked her forward by the arm. "Eyes down," he barked. The moment passed, and so did the last thread connecting her to the world inside. Back in her cell, Janelle lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting over her belly. The kicks had started. Soft at first, like bubbles, then stronger, sudden, jarring. It wasn't just real, it was alive. And she was alone. She replayed Curtis's voice in her head. You ever think about having kids? You're safe with me. You belong to me now. He hadn't touched her since the day she was isolated, but his presence lingered like mold in the walls, in her thoughts, in the sharp way the guards now spoke her name. They didn't call her Smiley anymore. Now it was just Carter, and sometimes not even that, just a grunt and a gesture. One morning, Officer Wilkins delivered a breakfast tray and paused. You seen a doctor yet? Janelle shook her head. Wilkins stared at the swelling beneath her shirt. Her jaw tightened, and she muttered, This place will eat you alive. Then she left, door slamming shut, lock clanging like a coffin lid. A week later, an internal investigator returned. Not the men from before. This time, a woman, Detective Regina Hale, tall, tired, with sharp features and wary eyes. She didn't sit. She stood at the edge of the cell and said, We've reopened the inquiry. I need to ask you some hard questions. Janelle didn't blink. Ask. And for the next 2 hours, she did. Everything. Every detail. Dates. Touches. Threats. Janelle described the missing notebook, the abuse, the retaliation, the silent treatment. She begged for protection, a transfer, a lawyer, anything. Detective Hale took notes. Her expression stayed cold. Then she tucked her pad into her coat and said, We'll be in touch. But Janelle knew what that meant. They weren't coming back. Days passed. The air in her cell felt heavier. Her feet swelled. Her stomach cramped. Something felt wrong, off balance, off rhythm. The baby wasn't moving as much. Her sleep became fractured, her eyes hollowed. And still, no doctor came. Until one night, late after lockdown, a loud buzz echoed through the hallway. Her cell door opened. 2 guards stood there, neither one familiar. One held a flashlight. The other held a roll of duct tape. Get up, the taller one said. Janelle's body froze. Why? No questions. You're being relocated. She hesitated. Now. She rose slowly, cradling her belly. She didn't resist. She didn't scream. Because in prison, resistance only guarantees pain. And screaming is a waste of breath when no one listens. They led her down 2 corridors, past the infirmary, and into a utility room she'd never seen before. No cameras, no windows, just the buzz of old lights and the smell of bleach. A folding chair in the center of the floor. A black duffel bag on a table. One guard shut the door. The other stepped close and whispered, Don't say anything stupid. Then the lights flickered, and everything went dark. The next morning, the official story said Janelle Carter was found unresponsive in her cell, that she had suffered a seizure, that attempts at resuscitation failed, that the fetus was non-viable. They claimed there was no sign of foul play, no evidence of abuse, no indication she had been moved from her cell at all. The death certificate said natural causes. The file was sealed. But inside the prison, the women whispered. LaToya heard it from a kitchen worker. Another inmate saw blood-stained gloves tossed into a burn barrel. A nurse overheard Wilkins crying in the break room. The notebook was never recovered. Curtis Langston resigned 2 days later. No charges were filed. But something had changed in Lowell. Because even though the officials tried to bury the truth, the women knew. And they didn't forget. Weeks later, graffiti appeared on the laundry room wall. A simple phrase written in soap. Smiley was pregnant. Now she's gone. The guards scrubbed it off. It reappeared the next day. In the outside world, Janelle's mother, Deborah Carter, received a cold phone call and a mailbox of her daughter's belongings. No explanation. No autopsy report. Just a letter that read, We regret to inform you, but Deborah didn't sit quiet. She contacted civil rights attorneys. She posted Janelle's story online. She held a candlelight vigil outside the gates of Lowell. And slowly, the press took notice. Headlines spread. Pregnant inmate dies under mysterious circumstances in Florida prison. Correctional officer under scrutiny after inmate's death. Mother demands justice for her daughter and her grandchild. But inside the prison, the halls remained quiet. The shadows stayed deep. And the name Janelle Carter became a warning. Because in Lowell, pregnancy wasn't a miracle. It was a death sentence. The walls of Cell Block C had seen their share of pain. But when the silence settled on the morning of June 3rd, it was heavier than usual. Unnatural, not the typical stillness of early shift change, but a silence that made seasoned guards exchange wary glances and inmates whisper behind closed doors. At exactly 5:42 a.m., Officer Jordan slipped his key into the lock of Janelle Carter's isolation cell. He knocked once, as required. No response. He knocked again. Still no sound. He hesitated, his fingers tightening on the knob. Inside, the air was thick with something unspoken, something that had already happened. When the door opened, Officer Jordan stood frozen. Janelle lay on the floor, face down, arms twisted unnaturally beneath her, as if she had collapsed mid-motion. Her skin was pale, lips darkened, her once swollen belly visibly slack. Her shirt, rumpled and stained, clung to her body in a way that told him everything before a word left his mouth. She was dead, and so was the child. He didn't call for medical first. He called the captain. Within minutes, the hallway outside Cell 3C became a traffic zone of hushed voices, clipboard-wielding officials, and two indifferent EMTs. They didn't attempt CPR. They didn't lift her gently. Her body was handled with the same mechanical urgency used for a malfunctioning air vent. The official statement was ready before the sun even cleared the trees. Inmate Janelle Carter was found unresponsive in her cell during morning rounds. Medical personnel responded immediately. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced deceased. Initial cause of death appears to be natural complications related to pregnancy. No foul play is suspected at this time. But no one in Cell Block C believed it, because they'd heard the sounds the night before. LaToya, housed 2 units away, swore she heard muffled cries at around 3 a.m. Another inmate claimed she saw Curtis Langston's familiar frame near the isolation wing after hours, a time when he wasn't even scheduled to work. Officer Wilkins had disappeared from the guard rotation altogether, and strangest of all, the camera above Janelle's cell had gone dark between 2:47 and 4:02 a.m. power failure, they said. Routine maintenance. But no one believed that either. The whispers grew louder. She screamed. I heard her. Curtis was there. I swear on my mama. They killed her to hide the baby. Word spread beyond the prison gates. Deborah Carter, Janelle's mother, received the call at 7:14 a.m. The voice on the other end was cold, robotic, reading from a script. We regret to inform you. She dropped the phone mid-sentence. Later that week, she stood at the gates of Lowell Correctional, holding a framed photo of Janelle. Her daughter's soft smile stared out at the press cameras with heartbreaking irony. Smiley, as they called her inside, a nickname that mocked what she endured and what the system buried with her. I sent my daughter here for 18 months, Deborah said. She came out in a body bag, pregnant and dead. Somebody better start talking. But no one did. Curtis Langston's personnel file was suddenly locked. Internal Affairs refused to confirm whether he was under investigation. No autopsy was released. No charges filed. Instead, a quiet PR campaign began. Claims that Janelle had pre-existing health conditions, that she refused medical care, that she may have self-harmed. And then, as if to punctuate the lie, the Florida Department of Corrections announced a routine transfer of Officer Langston. He was moved to a different facility, several counties away, still employed, still in uniform, still protected. Inside Cell Block C, the women grieved silently, but not all of them were silent. One inmate, known only as Miss T, had seen enough. She'd been locked up for 20 years, a lifer, and didn't scare easy. She approached the new warden, a temporary stand-in after the prior warden resigned unexpectedly. I want to talk, she said. About Janelle. The warden paused. Go through proper channels. Miss T leaned in. There are no proper channels here. 2 weeks later, A civilian investigator made an unannounced visit, not from the DOC, not from the state, but from a federal agency. They asked questions no one had dared ask before. Who had access to Janelle's isolation cell that night? Why was there no prenatal documentation in her medical file? Why did 3 guards assigned to her unit quit within a month of her death? One by one, pieces of the story began to unravel. A nurse admitted, off the record, that Janelle had complained of severe cramps the day before her death. But no doctor was sent. A janitor remembered seeing a bloodied bedsheet in a locked disposal cart. An anonymous guard left a note in a chapel pew. She didn't die naturally. They made sure of that. Still, no arrests, because in places like Cell Block C, truth isn't enough. It needs proof, and proof had a habit of disappearing. The final report would call it undetermined medical complication. But to the women still locked behind those bars, and to a mother who buried both her daughter and her unborn grandchild with no answers, it was murder. And somewhere in a quiet Florida town, Curtis Langston walked free. The smile he once admired on Janelle's face now haunted him in the mirror. And in every silence that followed him, he heard the sound of a final breath that wasn't his. In the weeks following Janelle Carter's death, what little trust remained in Florida's prison system began to crumble. Across newsrooms, legal offices, and advocacy groups, one question echoed louder than any other. Was this a tragic oversight or a deliberate cover-up? At first, the Department of Corrections did what it always did: release a generic statement. We take the safety and welfare of inmates seriously. We are conducting a full internal review. But Janelle's case wasn't a minor infraction swept under policy language. This was a young woman, visibly pregnant, in solitary confinement, impregnated by an officer, found dead under mysterious circumstances, and no one in charge seemed to want the truth told. Local media outlets tried to dig. Requests for body cam footage, security logs, and officer shift records were met with legal pushback or vague claims of ongoing investigation. Her autopsy report remained sealed. The identity of the attending physician never confirmed. Even her cause of death, undetermined complications related to pregnancy, was a phrase so broad it meant nothing and everything at once. For Janelle's mother, Deborah Carter, this wasn't just red tape. It was a second betrayal. They're acting like my daughter never existed, she said in an interview with Channel 7 News. Like the baby inside her was just a rumor. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit, not just against the prison, but against the state of Florida and correctional officer Curtis Langston by name. The suit alleged repeated sexual abuse and grooming of Janelle by Officer Langston, deliberate medical neglect once her pregnancy became visible, psychological torment through isolation, systemic silencing of both inmates and staff who tried to speak out. It was a powerful document, one supported by sworn affidavits from 3 former employees and 2 current inmates. But as the case gained traction, so did the machinery of defense. Curtis Langston denied all allegations. His attorney claimed the pregnancy could have come from another inmate. He insisted he barely knew Ms. Carter. But internal emails obtained by a whistleblower told another story. A disciplinary board had reviewed misconduct reports filed by a nurse and 2 junior officers months before Janelle's death. The documents reference inappropriate contact, unauthorized cell visits, and unexplained extended lock-ins involving Officer Langston and Janelle Carter. Nothing came of it. The files were quietly closed. The officers who submitted them were reassigned, and Officer Langston received a commendation for her exemplary restraint during conflict. It became clear that what happened to Janelle wasn't a freak tragedy. It was a failure, a long, rotting system that allowed predators in uniform to hide behind bureaucracy. And worse, it wasn't the first time. A 2019 investigation into Lowell Correctional revealed that 23 formal complaints of sexual abuse had been filed over a 5-year period. Only 2 resulted in criminal charges. The rest were marked inconclusive or unsubstantiated. In one instance, an inmate claimed she was impregnated by a lieutenant, only to be placed in solitary and lose the baby within weeks. Different names, same silence, same ending. Advocacy groups like the Florida Justice League and Women Behind Bars began to rally around Janelle's case. They launched social media campaigns with hashtags like hashtag Justice for Janelle and hashtag Prisons Are Not Graves. Petitions circulated demanding body cameras for all correctional officers, routine third-party prison inspections, mandatory prenatal care documentation for all incarcerated women. Thousands of signatures poured in. Still, the DOC remained largely unmoved. Inside the prison, fear ran deeper than ever. Inmates who spoke to journalists were punished. One was placed in dry cell, a windowless room with no running water, for 72 hours. Another was mysteriously transferred to a facility in the Panhandle, days after being quoted in the Miami Times. It wasn't just inmates being silenced. Officer Wilkins, the only staff member who had shown Janelle concern, resigned unexpectedly. She cited moral distress and claimed she was being targeted by higher-ups for not towing the line. In her final memo, obtained by investigative reporters, she wrote, "We all knew what was happening. Everyone looked away. I can't be a part of this anymore." As for Curtis Langston, he vanished from public view, his address scrubbed, his profile gone, no charges, no trial, and no justice. By fall, the lawsuit was stalled. The state filed motions to dismiss. Citing qualified immunity, their lawyers argued that prison staff acted within reasonable parameters. To them, Janelle Carter's life and death were just administrative risk. But to those who knew her, she was more than a statistic. She was a daughter who called her mother every Sunday, who loved to sing under her breath, who kept a worn notebook of poems under her mattress. She was a woman trying to get her GED while counting the days to freedom. She was 5 months pregnant with a child she would never get to name, and she was buried in a plain pine casket in a cemetery for the unclaimed because the state refused to release her body in time for a proper burial. Even in death, she remained locked away. So was it a cover-up? Or just another consequence of a prison system designed to break people, then deny their suffering? Maybe both. But one thing is certain, Janelle's blood now stains every silence, every delay, every form marked insufficient evidence. Her story is a mirror held up to a system that too often protects power and punishes the powerless. And unless someone keeps shouting her name, it will happen again.